This podcast looks at an essay question that it is about the rising living standards, or the apparent rising living standards under the Nazis after Hitler came to power. The question is, and it's a quote from a historian, Germans benefited from rising living standards in the years 1933 to 39. Do you agree? Explain your answer. It's from the June 2011 paper, so you might want to have a look at the Chief Examiner's report and the mark scheme on this one. But what I've done for you here is I've written a plan which I think would be a pretty solid approach to this particular question. Remember, it is 16 marks. 16 marks is 25 minutes. So it would need to be a paragraphed answer. So have a quick look, get an overview of the structure here. So you've got an introduction, and then you've got 4 main paragraphs, and then you've got a conclusion. So in terms of timing, we're saying 6 paragraphs in total, including the introduction and conclusion. We're talking about approximately 4 minutes per paragraph. So that gives you plenty of time to develop each of these points. Let's start off with the introduction. So remember, the introduction has got to really sort of like show that you understand what the question is about. You're given a proposition, you're given the proposal that the German people benefited from improved living standards. So clearly you've got to make the point or demonstrate knowledge about improved living standards, the fact that living standards did improve in the years 1933 to 39. And you're asked, did Germans genuinely benefit? So you're asked to dig beneath that and look at the arguments for that and the arguments against. Now, in the introduction, as you can see, clear focus on the issue of the fact that living standards were poor before Hitler came to power in 1933. And the obvious point to make, and I've underlined it here just to really stress it, is that before 1933, when Hitler came to power in 1933, the problem was unemployment. I've put in italics there, note the problem was not hyperinflation. That many candidates get confused between the two. The issue of rising prices was earlier, that was in 1923. Actually, in 1933, when Hitler came to power, prices were not rising. Okay, the issue was not inflation. The issue was people were losing their jobs. It was a deflating economy. That's why it is called a depression. So don't get that confused. So Hitler came to power in January 1933. Many people unemployed. One of the big promises that Hitler had made in his election campaigns that helped put him into power was that the Nazis would create jobs, and therefore living standards for millions of ordinary Germans would go up. That was the promise. So in your introduction, 2 or 3 sentences, just get across that sense that you understand what the question is about. You then move into the main body of the answer. Now, at a quick glance, what you can see here is as follows. It is an essay. The main body consists of 2 halves. The first half, which is paragraphs 2 and 3, agrees with the proposition. It says, yes, in many ways, living standards did go up and ordinary Germans benefited. And it presents an argument consisting of 2 paragraphs. The second half challenges it. Okay, so paragraphs 4 and 5. It then turns it around and says, but you dig beneath the surface, actually, Germans did not benefit from the apparent improvement in living standards. And as with all essay questions, that really is the approach you should take. You should argue in support and then present what we call a counter-argument in the second half. Let's go back to the first half then. So paragraphs 2 and 3, you're arguing in support. Now, the topic sentences are the key. Okay, so paragraph 2, the main topic, the main point you want to make is this. Nazi economic and military policies did lead to improved living standards for many Germans, no doubt about it, especially because they created jobs and especially in the early years, 1933 to 36. Really try to emphasise this. You'll get in this exam, you get a lot of questions about 1933 to 39. You can break it down into two halves there. The early years, 33 to 36, the Nazis were much more popular with the German people. Now, if all you have is the time to make that topic sentence, then your answer is well on target for a grade C. But you've got more than enough time to develop that point with some of the information that I put into the right here. So you could, in particular, try to mention Schacht. He was the man in charge of the economy at this time. He actually wasn't even a Nazi. Hitler put a non-Nazi in charge. And it was Schacht who led the National Labour Service schemes, the building of the autobahns, subsidising private industry. So really demonstrate that the drive for rearmament created jobs for people, and that in comparison to the years of the Great Depression, the living standards definitely went up. Big businesses especially benefited from rearmament. A lot of big businesses made a lot of money after 1936, but many workers were very happy because Hitler gave them jobs. And then in your next paragraph, you want to shift from economic to social policies. So paragraph 2 is focusing on the economic policies, paragraph 3 is focusing on the social policies. And so you develop a point here that with improved employment, living standards improved from the sort of social policies that came out of that. And in particular, talk about strength through joy. All workers belonged to the Strength Through Joy schemes. It gave them cheap holidays. It promised them the people's car. So a saving scheme was introduced, even though they actually never got their car. But workers looked forward to getting it. They felt that they were going to get a car in the end. The beauty of labour organisation improved conditions in the workplace by, for example, putting swimming pools in every factory. And the marriage loan scheme gave financial incentive to women to stay in the home. So remember, a part of the employment policy was women leaving the workplace, and there were incentives to go to the home. So you can present a pretty convincing case in the first half of your answer that living standards did improve, particularly early on. Then in the second half of your answer, you present the counter-argument. So paragraph 4, on the other hand, in many ways living standards did not improve, especially after 1936, when the economy became much more focused on preparing for war. So the type of points you want to make there, from 1936 onwards, the Strength Through Joy was less popular. Many workers argued that it only benefited the bosses. The bosses got to go on better holidays than the ordinary workers. The Volkswagen scheme never actually results for anybody. They never got their cars. The crushing of the trade unions removed workers' bargaining rights for decent wages. Wages were kept down. And especially as war approached, less consumer goods in the shops, the businesses, the factories were making weapons. So there was a definite sense, well, I've got jobs, but what am I going to spend my money on? My wages are low, my hours are long, and so there was a definite sense that living standards were not improving fast enough by the late 1930s. And then finally, paragraph 5, an important point to make is that the Nazis massaged the figures, that the official figures that argued that living standards had improved were falsified because there were the invisible unemployed. Jews and women were not included. Also, communists and opponents of the regime were not counted in the figures. So finally, the conclusion. Point out that although the Nazis did manipulate statistics to make improvements in standards appear to be greater, there's no doubt that living standards did improve, especially in the early years, 1933 to 36. But after 1936, the improvement in living standards slowed down as the 4-year plan began to focus the economy on preparations for war. So what your conclusion does is it sharply makes the point that The first 3 or 4 years of Hitler's rule, 1933 to 36, was a time in which the Nazis were popular because living standards did improve, but then from 1937 onwards, as war began to approach, living standards, or the improvement of living standards, effectively stopped. And Germans really were not very happy as the war approached. Hopefully that was helpful to you. That's a 25-minute answer. Have a go at writing that answer yourself.